Hi, welcome to GreenBiz Studio. I'm Margaret Morales, Director of the Carbon Program here at GreenBiz, and I'm excited to be joined by Samantha Weinberg, who is a Senior Sustainability Consultant at Agendi. Welcome, Samantha.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Okay, today we're going to talk about some of the new climate and emission disclosure regulations in California. The state enacted a number of new laws on these topics last fall. So, can you walk me through what are the new regulations and who's impacted?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a question that we get asked all the time at Agendi as, sustainability consultants or clients come to us and they're like, okay, these new regulations are passed, like now what? And so in particular, there are two main laws that were passed in California that are going to impact a number of companies, and they are SB 253, or the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, which really focuses on greenhouse gas inventories, really asking companies to calculate their carbon footprint. What are their emissions? And then there's also SB 261, or the Climate Related Financial Risk Act. And that's about having companies do climate related financial risk disclosure. If you're familiar with TCFD, or the Task Force on Climate Related Financial Risk Disclosures, it's asking companies to report in alignment with that. Now, who's impacted? This is a great question because it is not fully defined yet in the law. It is going to impact both public and private companies, which is an important distinction from some other regulations. Private companies are included. And it's those companies doing business in California that meet certain revenue thresholds, right? So for 253, you need to be doing $1 billion in revenue and be doing business in California. For 261, you need to be doing $500 million in revenue and be doing business in California. Thousands of companies are likely going to be impacted. What doing business in California means is not legally defined right now. It's going to be up to the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, to come up with those definitions. But given what we think those definitions are going to be, it's going to be thousands of companies that are going to have to comply with these laws.
Mhm. Okay. I mean, these policies are really first of their kind in many ways in the United States. So, what do you anticipate the impact will be? I mean, thousands of companies impacted, but what about in the bigger policy landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. They're very significant. California tends to be a bit of a trendsetter sometimes in the U.S. when it comes to these kinds of regulations. So even though federal rules like from the SEC are not finalized yet, California setting these laws is really important, because California's economy is so huge. $3.6 trillion of GDP. So when you think about the actual breadth of those who will be impacted by these laws, it's really, really significant. And it kind of can set the tone for what might be expected for federal level laws in the US, but also kind of tying what's going on in the US to maybe some other regulations that are happening elsewhere, like in Europe. So even though some people might say, oh, well, it's just a state level law, it's actually going to be kind of much bigger than just those companies who are headquartered in California. It's going to be much more inclusive than that. And it also might be a trendsetter for, say, other states like New York that's considering similar legislation and can kind of continue to widen the pool of companies that might be having to comply with similar regulations.
All right, so some of the deadlines for beginning emission disclosure are in 2026 for scopes one and two. What do you recommend companies start doing this year in 2024 to get ready for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And right now, the deadlines for both 253 and 261 start to come in force in 2026. Obviously, there are some question marks around whether or not that will get delayed. With the California state budget and with the lawsuit recently brought against California. But I think companies, it's really important for them to still start taking steps to prepare. 2024 is the year to prepare. So if you are kind of starting from the beginning and you've never done an inventory before, right, a really good first step would be thinking about the data you're going to need to collect in order to actually do a GHG inventory, right? And then thinking about where are those gaps in data, maybe that I need to start preparing to make sure I can get access to that data next year if I don't have it right now. And in particular, thinking about kind of who your internal dream team is that's going to help you get to that data, right? No one person's going to have access to all the information you might need to do an inventory. So thinking about who you need to know, from your facilities team, from HR, maybe from finance that can kind of help make sure you're collating all the data that you need to successfully do an inventory. And maybe if you're further along on your sustainability journey, you've done an inventory before, you can kind of take this opportunity to think more about, okay, I've done an inventory, but assurance is going to be required later down the line as part of these laws. So, what do I need to do in order to actually be ready for that as part of compliance if you've already got, an inventory under your belt?
Yeah. So it seems like building out some new systems, but it
Mhm.
also seems like there's opportunity for a lot of companies as they begin to build these systems. Can you talk a little bit about what opportunities you see here?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely been an emphasis on cost or risks around these laws, but there's tons of opportunities, and we don't want companies to overlook that. Firstly, there is really an opportunity to improve your reputation, right? Internally at your company, employees might find your sustainability approach incredibly important, and so kind of taking proactive steps on these issues could really improve your internal reputation, but also externally in terms of your brand, right? You could be seen as a sustainability leader by kind of getting out in front on some of these regulations and making sure that you're ready when they come into force. It's also a really good way to think about risk mitigation, right? For 261, you're going to have to think about your climate related financial risks, but also what steps you're taking to mitigate those risks. So it's actually helping companies think about how do I have longevity in my business because climate change is happening, the impacts of it are coming. And so, how do you make sure that you're ready and prepared to address that? And there's also a really great opportunity there for thriving together, right? Thinking about how you can collaborate with other businesses in your industry when issues come up from doing inventories, right? You see, ooh, that's maybe a tough area to reduce emissions. That's a challenge I'm facing. There's a really great way now with all the transparency we're going to have coming from these laws to be able to work with other businesses in your industry to maybe tackle those issues together.
All right. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us in the GreenBiz studio. I'm looking forward to seeing the Agendi team at GreenBiz.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.